I understand that you're also running this as an interactive course. So it means that many people resonate with the idea of the book and many people would like to learn more about this. One thing that I noticed when you explain all this, right, you mentioned that somehow engineers have a challenge to actually communicate well. Why do you think that is the case? Because lots of engineers are smarts. We know about facts, we know about logic and all that. Why is it so difficult for them to actually communicate?
So I think that it's both systemic and it's individual. I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I haven't done studies in brain. Actually, I did computer science, and one of the classes that I followed was psychology. So I did have one credit on psychology. So I know all the experiments they did with monkeys and stuff, but I'm not an expert there. So I don't know what makes a particular individual more in tune to be solving technical problems versus being extroverted. Like what makes somebody introverted versus extroverted? I don't know. But there are systemic things here. Like I remember that when I went to college, and if I look at hard skills and soft skills, we're talking about soft skills now. I think the name of this classification, hard and soft, is already a value judgment that we somehow attribute to these set of skills. Like the hard skills you're proud of. I know Java, I know databases, I know cloud. Those are hard skills. Apparently they're hard to achieve. And the other ones are soft. I think the name should be reversed. Talking with people is actually hard. Learning about programming languages or databases is actually easy and soft because it's much more predictable. As engineers, if you know one language, it's very easy to learn the next language. That's much more difficult with people because everybody's different. Developing empathy is a really difficult skill for engineers to get. So that's the systemic approach. I think when I went to college, about 90% of my classes were hard skills, so technical skills, and maybe 10% were soft skills, but not even focused. So I didn't get a class in how to collaborate in a team, how to make shared decisions, how to run a meeting. Those kinds of key skills that make you more successful in life and in engineering, I was never taught. So you're supposed to pick them up. You have to be very lucky to be in an environment where your environment actually helps you to learn all these kinds of skills after you're already hired, basically. Some companies have really good mentoring environments, internal training. And aside from that, from my personal observation, engineers are less interested talking to other people. They, quote unquote, hate meetings. They don't like to present. It's like they get nerve-wracking, nervous if they have to present about their work, even in their own team. I've really tried to discover what that is. So what I've done is just give a list of all those skills that I think are key and show how easy it is to learn these skills. They're learnable skills. We often think as engineers that somebody is just a good presenter, or they have social skills, or they have charisma, or they're a natural leader. Nobody's a natural leader. Everybody can learn this is a skill, and you can become a better presenter by practicing, by using methodologies. All these things, even though they're soft skills and very hard to learn, we think they're not so hard.
I like the way that you said that we should probably think about reversing the hard and the soft. I kind of resonate that as well. Having been an engineer all my life as well, sometimes, yes, communicating is hard. Which brings us to the important topic here. Why do you think communication is so important for engineers? All engineers would think that, okay, my job is to write code and I talk to the machine. I don't talk to people. So why do you think communication is so important for engineers?
Yep, it's a very good question. I used to work at Google, like we said in the introduction. I was involved in a project called Tempo, where we wanted to figure out how to make engineers more productive. Tempo is actually a tool that instruments your desktop, and it just watches what you're doing all the time. Using machine learning, we then tried to figure out how productive you were. And we tried to correlate that to whether you were happy or not. So we actually asked literally the question, randomly, the pop-up shows up. How happy are you right now? We just asked the question and you get like star 1 to 5, right? If you have enough data, at some point you can start correlating using machine learning, which is great for this. You can start correlating situations that make engineers unhappy versus situations that make them happy. One of the things that we figured out was that deep work, like long blocks of uninterrupted studying time on the problem and solving it, is what makes engineers happy. I mean, they voted more happy when they were in this zone phase or in the concentration phase. We also tried cameras. So if you allow And if you're an engineer at Google doing this research that Google does, you're more tempting to do this by turning on your camera all day, and you can do analysis of facial expressions, and you can actually see if somebody is happy or not. So then you have a fine-grained signal to see what are they doing right now, like how many times did they switch between tools. And we started finding out that context switching is very expensive and they hurt your productivity. So these are all like useful information. Try to solve our problem, like what makes them more productive. But a side effect from that was that we also measured what are you doing right now and classify the things that you were doing. Like sometimes you go to email and then you spend some time there. You go to chat and then you go to your IDE and you type some things and you do builds. And then if you do a measurement of how much time do you actually spend coding, it's about 30% of your time for the average engineer that had this tool turn on. So what do you do in the rest of the time? The other 70%. And that's all communication. That is all interacting with other engineers. This is all has to do with making decisions together, planning, synchronizing our work, increasing the quality of the code that we deliver as a team, as an organization. It's about learning what is important for our organization right now. So a lot of that has nothing to do with coding, but more about why are we building the code or how are we doing this certain process. So that is one interesting fact, I think. 30% of your time is coding, and you better be good at the other 70%, because if you get twice as good in the communication part, you have a lot more opportunity for growing your impact. What I've seen too is that at some point, engineers become more senior. And when you get more senior, you tend to spend time in coding even less. And you spend more time into mentoring other engineers, in guiding them, in trying to understand the bigger picture. As a junior engineer, you're right out of school. You go to stand up and they give you 5 tickets and you work these 5 tickets and that's it. You may have some questions about what does this mean? What does this mean? How do I do that? But you don't try to understand why are we building these tickets. Your emphasis is to fix these 5 tickets as quickly as possible and get the next 5. So at some point, somebody has to give you these tickets. And that's what senior engineers do. We're all on the scale of between like junior and very advanced. But at some point, you reach a position where most of your impact is actually measured on how you influence other people, how you show leadership. Like the word leadership in itself assumes that you transfer your experience to other people, and that by delegating the work that you would normally do yourself to others, you can actually become much more impactful. And that requires a lot of communication too. So when you see people transition from a more junior role to a more senior role, they will also become better communicators. So in summary, if you want to grow, you need to communicate. If you want to be productive, you want to be impactful, you need to communicate.
So I see this as you explained when you said that 30% coding time and 70% is more about communication, planning, coordination, and all that. And as you get more senior, the lesser time it is to actually spend time in coding. I think this is also a lot of time, a lot of seniors, growing, aspiring senior engineers struggle as well, because they thought that when they become engineer, they're supposed to do a lot more coding work. But as they progress throughout their career, the reverse is true. The less time you spend in coding and more about communication. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, of course, there are exceptions. There are always individuals that, if you look at the knowledge or experience of a particular individual, there's something like the T experience, a T structure, right? So you're broad, but then you have one specialist in which you're really deep. Most engineers, if you ask them like, hi, I'm Chris, well, yeah, who are you? And they say, I'm an Android engineer. Or they say, I'm a backend engineer, or I write Go or whatever. This is not you, right? This is one of your deep skills. So as a senior engineer, you start to focus more on your horizontal skills, like your understanding of the full stack of the problems that customers have and how are we solving them. Being able to break down problems into smaller parts, communicating teams, like I said earlier, seeing the bigger picture. So those skills come up automatically once you get more senior. There are many channels in which you do this communication. I'll just give you some examples here. It's like emails, tickets, chats, design docs, meetings. And a meeting is multidimensional. You have to learn how to send invites. That seems like a simple thing, but it's not so simple. Somebody has to take notes in a meeting. How do you set up Zoom? How do you set up a camera correctly? Who is talking in a meeting? Who is making sure that everybody's heard? How do you get diversity? But some actually excel and they treat this as an opportunity to sell their brand. That's what you see as well. It's like successful engineers. They have a brand and they treat it as such. I mentioned earlier performance reviews, which are a highly stressful event for engineers, because now you suddenly have to write about what you've done this year. Even if you remember, how do you actually translate it into something that other people find impressive is not easy. Even writing commits, code reviews, these are all communication. I'll just share this to the audience. Like before we had this call, Henry and I, we had a few minutes before we hit record. We actually talked about the commonalities that we had, like our common experience, our common history, to find some common ground so that we interact better. Those are very subtle things that if you know to apply them, you will come over as a better communicator and therefore get more opportunities as an engineer. This is ideally what you want, right? You're in a team and you want to grow, not just get a better title, but you want to move to a project that is interesting. Even inside the company, there are opportunities. I'll use Google again. Say you work on Google Cloud, and now you want to work on Google Maps. How do you get that opportunity? How do you find out what you can do, what you can add or contribute to Maps? How do you know who's working there? So all these things are opportunities if you have the ability to communicate, if you have the ability to articulate your goals and execute on them. So these are all examples of why communication skills are essential for engineers to be happy. Again, this is not about making more money or being successful or something. My goal is just to make you happy. I see a lot of engineers be unhappy when I think a lot of that has to do with not being able to control their environment, even articulate what they want to have change in this environment. So I think by becoming a better communicator, you will become also happier.